So in this segment, we're going to be talking about Liz Truss to push ahead with unlimited investment zones despite costs, the costs of it. These investment zones we've spoken about in the past, essentially like it's almost like a free port, but without the port effectively. These have their own kind of judicial systems, their own tax laws, their own employment rights. It's honestly wild. They claim they use these in developing countries in order to create some stability here, but I think it's just there for corporate exploitation, I'll be honest with you. Liz Truss is preparing to push ahead with an unlimited number of investment zones, despite a row within the government that it could hand an uncosted blank cheque of tax breaks to businesses because they can just set themselves lower tax rates or no tax rates. The investment zones are basically another name for free ports. They can treat people, pay people less and treat them worse. They're not included with trade deals, so it creates a border in and out of these areas. I have no idea how that would even work. These things are a nightmare. The cost of a taxpayer would be immense because businesses would just set up shop in these areas. They would move planned investment in the UK or existing stuff into these zones potentially. This would not be new money. This would be existing plans just being moved. A nightmare. So effectively, say if you're going to invest 10 million in the UK, right? You want to build, a factory making car parts. Now, all of a sudden, this investment zone opportunity pops up. So instead of setting it up within, say, Northampton, outside of a investment zone area, you open it inside, say, Northamptonshire, where there is an investment zone area. It's not new money here. There's just money being moved around. An accountancy trick, but worse. The Treasury is believed to have raised concerns about carpet bombing the entire country with investment zones, with the government about to announce an appeal for areas to apply within days as the Conservatives prepare for their annual conference. So this was before their conference, but you can see there's not a lot of applicants if they're still looking for people or areas. So Kwateng seems to be against this, a Truss special then. There seems to be more on her, the idea of pushing these investment zones everywhere. However, Whitehall officials, including the Treasury, are extremely concerned about the potential liability of not capping the numbers of areas allowed to get favourable tax and planning treatment. There is also concern that some of the tax breaks under consideration will last for 10 years. Potentially would have to wait 2 electoral cycles to try and get rid of these zones. It might even be more depending on how it works. Otherwise, they'd probably sue the government. How much could it cost at that point to get rid of them? The extra unfunded spending comes after a week of market turmoil and a Bank of England bailout for pension funds on the back of the government's mini-budget that promised £45 billion of tax cuts paid by borrowing. How are you going to pay for all of this stuff? Because belief won't be anywhere near enough. Within the new investment zones, businesses will receive big tax cuts, with options under consideration, including the abolition of stamp duty, which you pay on houses above a certain price. I think it's 200k. Employment taxes being slashed. I think there might be a reference to national insurance. Planning rules swept aside, and companies being able to write off investments in plant and machinery. So you can write off all this stuff, so you don't pay tax on it, which you could do already. I think you can write off a lot for business expenses, but slashing things like planning permission, so you could build loads of unsafe factories and things like that. Also get rid of green areas and protected areas. It's just wild. This is a libertarian wet dream at this point, but who else but Mogg could come up with something like this? Probably some of the Mandem at the Telegraph, to be honest. I so hope they get rid of Truss before any of this can happen. An ongoing row has been raging in Westminster, with some officials in the Treasury and Department for Housing, Levelling Up and Communities concerned about the potential implications on handing limitless tax breaks to businesses. At the mini-budget, Kwateng, the Chancellor, did not put a costing on the policy. So he didn't say how much these investment zones could actually cost. They have no idea how much it would cost. I would not be surprised if most of these zones were not based in the north of England, and the Tories can say, look at all these businesses setting up in the Red Wall. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. One government source says there had been debate about capping the number, but Truss's team has pushed back. Despite officials raising concerns, the Treasury is among the departments to have objected, but a source said Kwateng would deliver whatever Truss wants. I mean, it's awkward phrasing given their kind of romantic life, shall we say, but it shows you that these two are in it together. Even though Kwateng might be against it in principle, he's willing to go to the end of this idea, which is going to be an absolute disaster. Another Whitehall said that some in government have pushed for a cohort of several dozen, but number 10 repeatedly demanded more. So they want a mass amount of investment zones in the country. After 38 areas were approached and asked to consider becoming investment zones so they could be announced by Kwarteng in the mini-budget, the offer of making a formal expression of interest is set to be made to all local authorities. So that must be all of them within England minimum. It might be all of them in the United Kingdom. The announcement is understood to have been pushed back several times due to the row between departments. It's very clear that this is not popular at all because it's a ton of work and not a ton of return. There was no costing for investment zones in Kwarteng's growth plan document. It should be noted that for some policies, for instance investment zones, full details on implementation are yet to be determined, meaning that it's not possible to publish costing. Such policies will be included in the public finance at a future OBR forecast once there is sufficient certainty about their implementation. So the OBR forecast is set to be released on the November 23rd. That's well over a month away. They still need to find local authorities that want to take these zones on. On the 23rd of November, Kwarteng will put out more details as to what the plans are. But we still, even at that point, we still might not know the full impact. Not really, because the government might change some of the stuff they intend to do around these investment zones, or they might just block the OBR report again. It's just madness. The controversial announcement has already drawn fire from tax campaigners who describe it as triggering a race to the bottom, which is true. The Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who's not, I'm not the biggest fan of, last week said the plans would result in moving growth around the country, not creating growth. I mean, it's true. Planning changes under consideration include removing restrictions on height limits and potentially ditching requirements for affordable housing alongside developments. So effectively, some developers are tasked with creating social housing within their housing blocks. Government will get rid of that, as well as other regulations such as environmental rules. So essentially, they can just buy up loads of green land and just turn it into an absolute toxic waste zone. Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, said more unfunded borrowing in investment zones with no plan will only lead to a market chaos made by the Tories. I mean, it's going to lead to a lot more than market chaos, let's be honest there. These investment zones will do nothing for levelling up, slashing standards, destroying the environmental standards, and scrapping affordable housing is reckless and offers no prospect of sustainable growth, which, again, is all true. Not all Conservative MPs are impressed either, though the policy is less popular than the 45p tax cut, which the government have U-turned on. One Tory MP said, you either have investment zones or an investment country. If you want the latter, what's the point of the former? Which is true that if you want the country to be invested in on the whole, these investment zones are kind of pointless in a sense. A government spokesperson said they would set a high bar for establishing investment zones and anticipate a specific number across the country where they will have the greatest impact on growth. I mean, this is all nonsense here, but imagine if they can set their own rules in these so-called investment zones, right? I would not have been surprised if a load of Russians or oligarchs, if there wasn't a war, if the Russians didn't invade Ukraine, right? I would imagine a load of these oligarchs, not just Russian ones, all over the world, they would have set up investment zones in the UK where, do they even have extradition agreements in there? Are they treated as separate kind of areas in the UK? Because free ports, I think, kind of are. They're linked with a lot of crime here. How kind of separate would these investment zones be? Because I read stories about some of them, used around the world, have their own judicial systems. What if they don't have extradition agreements? Maybe I'm going too far into this, I don't know, but this is an absolute nightmare. This will lead to a two-tier country, effectively, different laws and things like that. It'll be like the American federal system, but so much worse. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Hopefully most of the video made sense, and I'll catch you in the next one.